Why aren't there more kaiju anime? It's a question that many fans have been asking ever since the ill-fated Godzilla anime trilogy was first announced. In the trilogy's wake, this question has been raised even more frequently, as the many fans who were left dissatisfied with it have been seeking alternatives, only to find that there are relatively few to speak of. While live-action kaiju works, both old and new, are plentiful, kaiju anime and manga are rare. In addition to the trilogy, you have Neon Genesis Evangelion, Attack on Titan, a rarely seen Ultraman series, Neoranga, Gunbuster and its sequel Diebuster, SSSS Gridman, Monster Tamer Girls, Island of Giant Insects, Nobunagun, Negadon the Monster from Mars, and maybe Pokemon and Digimon if you squint at them sideways, but I don't know how many people would agree. That's not a big selection to choose from, especially given the thousands upon thousands of anime titles that exist. Even if you cheat a little and count fantasy series with dragons and giants in them, the number remains relatively small. So again, why are there so few? A video by YouTuber TitanGoji attempted to answer this question in June of 2017. It's an interesting video, and I certainly don't want to diminish the work he put into it, but having heard his argument myself, I can't really say that I agree with his conclusion. According to TitanGoji, the reason we don't see more kaiju anime and manga is because the kaiju genre started out in live action, and thus it is viewed as a live action concept that does not translate to animation. To be fair, he's not wrong in saying that kaiju started in live action, but the idea that its lack of presence in animation is because of that makes no sense. Originating in an illustrated format didn't stop the superheroes of Marvel and DC from making the jump to live action, nor did originating as plastic statuettes stop the Warhammer 40,000 game from inspiring multiple prose novels. Then again, those are properties that originated in Western culture, where some priorities and practices are different than what you might find in the East. In order to make a truly airtight case as to why I find this claim inaccurate, I need an example that comes straight from Japan. Lucky for me, I've got one. The kaiju genre does not exist in a vacuum. It's usually counted as a subcategory of tokusatsu, the banner term for live-action works that rely heavily on special effects. Another subcategory of tokusatsu is mecha, a genre defined not by giant monsters, but by giant robots. The mecha genre also got its start in live action, and in the early days it bore a striking resemblance to kaiju. The first mecha to appear in Japanese pop culture, as far as I've been able to find, was Mogera in 1957's The Mysterians. After that, we saw a particular prevalence of mecha in live-action TV. Iron King, Johnny Sacco and his Flying Robot, Super Robot Red Baron, Toei's Spider-Man, and the Super Sentai franchise that would eventually be reinterpreted stateside as Power Rangers. We can all agree that these are live-action works done in similar style to the kaiju genre, yes? It can't exactly be denied. The same methods were used across the board, and there was even a lot of crossover in those early days between the two, so there's an obvious connection here. Perhaps you already guessed where I'm going with this, so I won't drag things out any longer. Here's the big twist. The fact is that the mediums of anime and manga are packed to overflowing with mecha. Macross, Aquarion, Code Geass, Escaflowne, Mazinger Z, Getter Robo, Tetsujin, Patlabor, The Big O, Zoids, Armored Trooper Votoms, Gurren Lagann, Gunsword, Full Metal Panic, Voices of a Distant Star, Martian Successor Nadeshiko, Voltron, not to mention 32 different Gundam titles and counting, and I barely even scratched the surface naming all of those. Heck, some of those anime I listed as kaiju earlier are usually counted as mecha series, including Evangelion despite it having only one proper robot in the whole series. So clearly, starting out in live action did not hinder mecha from dominating the anime industry in any way, so that can't possibly explain the lack of kaiju in the medium. It has to be something else. But what? Well, before we answer that question, we need to acknowledge something that most people in the West either forget or deny. the vast majority of anime and manga is made for children. I know, a lot of them contain material that we in America wouldn't deem suitable for children, and most examples that make their way over here either tend to air on late-night TV or require age verification before you can stream them, or on rare occasions are butchered to remove mature content. But in Japan, the largest demographics for anime are shonen and shoujo, boys and girls respectively in the 12 to 18 age bracket. Most of the mecha series I listed for you are shonen series, meaning young and teenaged boys are the intended audience. Something that boys in general really enjoy in their fiction is power fantasy. Whether it's a comic book about a superhero they relate to, or a video game where they control the silent protagonist saving the universe from evil, power fantasy is everywhere in fiction aimed at boys. Why? Because boys want to be heroes, plain and simple, regardless of what culture they're raised in. Now, with all of this in mind, we can answer the question of why, despite their shared origins, mecha are so prevalent in anime while kaiju are rare. The reason is because mecha can be controlled. Without somebody at the controls, a giant robot is a paperweight incapable of doing anything. It's just sitting there, waiting for someone to operate it, and that someone doesn't need to be an adult. Many mecha are piloted by kids, just like you, the kid watching this at home. Boom! Power fantasy. Mecha are the vehicles that allow even the small and weak to become titans who can fight on the front lines of history's most epic battles. You can't exactly have that kind of power fantasy in a traditional kaiju story. Kaiju are independent creatures who think for themselves and can't be controlled. Well, okay, you can try controlling them, but that rarely works out. Since they're so much bigger than any human being, you can't really fight them on your own, and victory always comes at a cost. If two kaiju show up to fight each other, the most any regular person can do is cheer for one of them from the sidelines. Throw a robot into the mix, and it'll probably be destroyed. Where's the empowerment in that? Now, to avoid any misunderstanding, I should specify at this juncture that what I'm building towards is not a conclusion that mecha are for kids and kaiju are for adults. Obviously, that's not the case. There are kaiju works aimed at children, just as there are mecha works aimed at adults, and demographics don't restrict people who fall outside of them from joining the audience. What I'm saying is that this is how studios, toy companies, and marketing departments see things. They want to market their works to kids, and that's easier to do when you have a power fantasy to sell. A power fantasy is humanist by nature, and as I've said in previous videos, the kaiju genre is generally anti-humanist. In the case of an action-packed anime for young boys, power fantasy and kaiju will mix about as well as oil and water. Unless, of course, you reduce the kaiju to disposable opponents to be defeated. Indeed, the relatively few kaiju anime that do exist follow that line of thinking. More often than not, these works are human-focused to the point where the monsters are non-entities. The kaiju often have no individuality and sometimes aren't even all that interesting to look at, because they only exist to be obstacles for the human hero to overcome. Attack on Titan isn't about the Titans, it's about Eren Yeager. The Godzilla anime trilogy isn't about Godzilla, it's about Haruo Sakaki. Neo-Ranga isn't about Ranga, it's about the Shimabara sisters. Evangelion, even taking its deconstructive elements into account, isn't about the Angels or the Evas, it's about Shinji Ikari. Pokémon isn't about the Pokémon, it's about Ash Ketchum. Or if we go back to the original games, it's about you, the player who catches and trains these monsters to do your bidding. You can't get much more blatant than that last one. So that, I would say, is the real reason kaiju in anime are so rare, and why they are often reduced to cannon fodder whenever they do show up. It's got nothing to do with the medium from which they hail, but rather the inability, or perhaps unwillingness, of people to make it marketable. I don't know how to solve that issue, or if it even needs solving in the first place, but I do believe this is the root cause. Well, at least we have the live-action stuff to enjoy. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.